Police Commissioner Ray Kelly of New York is joining us right now. He has just written an impassioned defense of police tactics like stop and frisk, comparing New York to some other cities. New York, wildly successful, murder and violent crime down to record lows. Good morning, Commissioner. How are you?
Good morning, Geraldo. Good to be with you, as usual.
So, in light of the Trayvon Martin decision and all the heat you've been taking on stop and frisk, you've written a vigorous defense. The headline that it works and it's fair.
Well, actually, the headline is that the New York City Police Department is being punished for saving 7,383 lives. And in the article, or in the op-ed piece, we compared the 11 years prior to Mayor Bloomberg's tenure and the 11 years of Mayor Bloomberg's mayoralship, and we show that there's 7,383 fewer murders. It goes from roughly 13,000 down to 5,800. And those lives saved are largely young men of color, and that's what we tried to emphasize, because in this debate that people seem to leave out the effects of what the tactics and strategies are accomplishing in New York City, and that is the saving of lives. So he thought it was important to at least put that on the table.
You also talk about the fact that, you know, people don't like to talk about who is committing the crime and who are being victimized by violent crime, and that the police tactics that you're talking about are happening in neighborhoods where they have to happen because that's where the crime is.
Well, that's true. We put police officers where the crime is, and the stark reality is that there is a disproportionate amount of crime in minority communities, and they're going to have, or they're going to be more contacts with the police in those neighborhoods. But you also point out that things are working and that lives are being saved, and the beneficiary of those tactics are the people who live in those communities. And by the way, I'm in those areas all the time, and there is a demand on the part of a lot of people for more proactivity on the part of the police, not less. So it's important in these debates to sort of determine with some specificity who's speaking for who, and you can have lawyers from well-meaning groups that live outside the New York City sort of take on the mantle of spokesman for people who are being victimized by crime. So it's a complex issue, but I think the bottom line is that things in terms of public safety concerned are going well in New York, and of course there's efforts to overturn that, at least in my judgment.
Speaking with Commissioner Ray Kelly of New York, the title of his op-ed, the NYPD guilty of saving 7,383 lives. You know, Commish, over the weekend on Saturday, I was downtown Manhattan as the Reverend Al Sharpton staged, a protest, a demonstration, I guess. Why the emphasis on the victimization of young black men, and not what you suggest, that these tactics are necessary in terms of what the police does, the police department does to prevent more tragedies in the minority community? Well,
I think when you talk about the tragedy of Trayvon Martin, it shouldn't equate or shouldn't be injected into the discussions about stop and frisk. It's really apples and oranges. These were two private citizens who, had this encounter. And I know it is a very significant event for the African American community. They understand that. They feel that they're not getting a fair shake in the criminal justice system, or many of them do. But the issue about the stop question, and sometimes frisk, because it certainly doesn't happen in every case. It happens in less than half of the encounters. It really has to do, in my judgment, with the saving of young lives. We know, not only in this city, even though crime is way down, there's a disproportionate amount of shootings and crimes of violence in communities of color. So to the extent that we are effective, we are saving those young lives. And I think that has been left out of the discussion. Most of the people who talk about changing, altering, stopping this practice have no alternative. The tactics and strategies that we're using here in New York are obviously working. We have the lowest murder rate per 100,000 of any city in America, any major city in America. And so, I think responsible people have an obligation to come forward with alternatives if, in fact, we change these tactics significantly, because they're going to result in more people losing their lives. And so what is their alternative? I haven't heard it yet, quite frankly.
Granted, Trayvon Martin and black-on-black crime are very different issues. Why, do you get why the Trayvon Martin case can have such emotional resonance and so little discussion, relatively speaking, about black-on-black crime, focused more, at least in terms of those who are most vocal, on police tactics that have demonstrated they reduce black-on-black crime?
Well, I do understand. I know you were very much involved in covering the trial, but I do understand the feelings in the African-American community. I've spoken to many of my friends, African-American friends, in this regard, and it has tremendous resonance. Again, it gets back to, I think, the fundamental belief that African-Americans don't get a fair shake in the criminal justice system. But, I think it's separate and apart from the strategies and tactics that we're using here in New York. It's not stop and frisk is a practice that is exercised in every law enforcement agency in America. You need the right of inquiry. Otherwise, you might as well just sit in your police car, wait for 911 calls, and then take a report after a crime happens. So crime is down in other areas in America because of proactive policing strategies, not just reactive, not just waiting for a call. So this is a complex issue in many ways, but again, if you look at the numbers in New York, you realize that lives are being saved in a very significant way. The numbers speak for themselves, and people who look to undermine the practices here, I think, have a responsibility to come forward and say, what would they do so that we don't see an increase particularly in young lives lost.
Are you frustrated that you don't seem to get much vocal support from those most vocal in the community?
Well, that's the nature of government these days. Those who shout the loudest get the most coverage, and good news is not news. So, the fact that we had record low years in murders and shootings last year, and we're running 30% below that this year, is not written about. You don't hear it on television. You only hear bad news. You only hear a controversy. So it's hard to get the good news aspect of what's going on out. So I think that leads to frustration, certainly on the part of, generally speaking, people in law enforcement.
Putting aside Anthony Weiner and his troubles, is there a candidate running for mayor that backs stop and frisk as it currently exists? I know there are proposals now for an inspector general to oversee the NYPD. You've got a federal lawsuit where you have a judge who seems activist and wanting to take a shot at you. What's the future hold?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. We'll see what the judge decides, and we'll see whether or not the city council can override the mayor's veto. But I think certainly these pieces of legislation have great potential in undermining all the good work that's been done. And I think the people in the city council really need to reflect and think about the consequences of what happens if, in fact, these two pieces of legislation go forward.
So you worried?
Well, I think all New Yorkers should be worried. Not just me or not just the law enforcement. It really has to do in a very basic way the future of the city.
Are you going to stick around?
Well, I'm not. I haven't made plans yet. I'm focusing on the job I have at hand.
Paul Brown, your terrific deputy, leaving. You going to miss him?
Oh, absolutely. He's done a terrific job. He's been great.
Have you ever had any conversations with Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, and give him some advice on how to stop a murder rate that's more than 3 times New York's?
No, we're not in a position of advising anybody. I know Rahm Emanuel. I worked in Washington with Rahm when he was the deputy chief of staff for President Clinton, and I've spoken to him since he was elected mayor. But we're not in a position to advise other cities. They have to make these decisions on their own. No cities are exactly alike. The demographics are different. The political landscape is different. So we're just focusing on New York here.
Your article, the NYPD guilty of saving 7,383 lives.